welcome to Dawn's latest event titled Rightsizing the U.S.-Saudi Relationship, What to Make of Mohammed bin Salman's Washington Visit. We're incredibly excited to host this event and want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today for this important discussion. With Saudi Crown Prince and de facto leader Mohammed bin Salman visiting the United States tomorrow, the U.S.-Saudi relationship is once again being thrust into the limelight. Today's panel aims to discuss the nature of that relationship just over 7 years after the assassination of Dawn's founder, Jamal Khashoggi. The result of that horrific act, alongside countless other human rights violations across the Middle East and globe, present many of the same questions and challenges of the last decade regarding Washington's treatment of Riyadh. From widespread civilian harm resulting from the Saudi-led bombing campaign in Yemen to ongoing repression of political exiles and dissidents at home and abroad, many rightly question U.S. deference to the kingdom given its human rights record to date. We look forward to analyzing this context over the next hour and a half with you all. For some background, Dawn is a nonprofit organization that supports democracy and human rights in the Middle East and North Africa. Our vision is for a world where the human rights, liberty, and dignity of every person in the Middle East and North Africa are upheld by democratically elected governments, safeguarded by independent institutions and civil society organizations working under the law, and supported by international governments and institutions around the world. Our research, analysis, and foreign policy advocacy on MENA governments with close ties to the United States and on the military, diplomatic, and economic support the U.S. government provides them, since that is where we believe we have the greatest responsibility and the greatest opportunity for influence. Our goal is to ensure that U.S. foreign policy supports the people in the MENA region by ending support for their abusive, undemocratic governments. We believe that U.S. national interests are ill-served by support for these governments and better protected by policies that foster peace, freedom, equality, and justice. As a reminder, we strongly encourage your participation in our event. Please share your questions and comments using the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom application. We welcome your thoughts on the subject and hope you can engage our excellent panel of experts throughout the talk. So with that, let's move on to our panel. We have a solid lineup for today. First off, I want to start with Abdullah Alaoudh, who is the Countering Authoritarianism Senior Director at the Middle East Democracy Center. Previously, he served as the Saudi Director at the Freedom Initiative. He was a visiting adjunct professor at the Elliott School at George Washington University and served for 2 years as a senior fellow at the Al-Walid Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He also was a postdoctoral fellow at Yale Law School at the Center for Islamic Law and Civilization between 2017 and 2018. Abdullah also previously served as the director of the Gulf at Dawn for 3 years. Additionally, we have Hala Aldosari, who is a Saudi women's rights activist and Dawn non-resident fellow. She was awarded the Alison DeForges Award for Extraordinary Activism by Human Rights Watch in 2018. She has also worked as a biomedical scientist, a consultant for the Ministry of Health of Saudi Arabia, and as a lecturer of health sciences. She completed a postdoctoral fellowship on the social determinants of health and gender-based violence research at Johns Hopkins University. She also completed a fellowship researching the influence of gender norms on women's rights in the Arab Gulf states. Aldosari serves as on the advisory board of the Human Rights Watch Middle East North Africa Division and the Gulf Center for Human Rights. Finally, we have Sarah Lee Whitson, who is the executive director of Dawn. Sarah Lee has previously served as an executive director of Human Rights Watch's Middle East North Africa Division from 2004 to 2020. Overseeing the work of the division in 19 countries, with staff located in 10 countries. Whitson has led dozens of advocacy and investigative missions throughout the region, focusing on issues of armed conflict, human rights, accountability, and legal and policy reform. All right, so with that, we're going to go into our opening statements from our panelists. I'm pleased to hand the floor over to Abdullah. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. I'm really honored and excited to be among these esteemed colleagues. First of all, I think this is an important moment. We are talking while MBS is going to land in Washington, D.C. For his first visit after the Khashoggi murder. And I think this is important for many reasons. But the main reason here is that the level of rehabilitation that MBS is going to embark on, that actually for him, he thinks is going to turn the page on everything Khashoggi related and be treated as totally, free from all the Khashoggi baggage that he created since October 2018. So I think that's number one. Number two, For him, it's basically his first main international visit, and it's not to any country, it's to the US, where he wants more security guarantees, more agreements, civil nuclear help from the US, F-35, and discussions about normalization with Israel. So big files, and we don't know how much of these files are going to be basically included or concluded actually during the visit. But for what matters to us is that the visit comes during the worst human rights record when it comes, for example, to executions. Only this year, 2025, we are surpassing last year, which is a record number of executions. It's the worst record of executions in the history of the Arabian Peninsula ever. Talking about more than 330 people executed so far, only in 2025. The executions included, for example, 2 child defendants at least that people documented and followed, and included a few journalists, including prominent journalist Turki El-Jasser, who was executed on June 14th this year, and Abdullah Shambali, who was executed February last year. He's an analyst. Abdullah Shambali was an analyst who has relationship to a lot of folks around the world and authors who talked about Saudi Arabia and the politics of Saudi Arabia. The execution of Turki El-Jasser, I think, marked the shift in Saudi policy from killing journalists behind closed doors in consulates to killing journalists in plain sight with the judiciary sanction. But like at the same time, getting less outcry, getting less headache from that, and getting less even coverage than the Khashoggi murder. So for MBS, he tried everything, and he nevertheless is still treated as a normal political leader that they roll the red carpet for and welcome and make international deals. And this is not strange to the city, where the chief of the city is actually part of this, problematic, I would say, policies around so many files. But coming back to MBS and the human rights record, I think the second thing that I'll mention is this fallacy around MBS and dictators that just recently Tom Barrack mentioned during an interview. And Tom Barrack is the current envoy to Syria and Iraq. Is it Iraq? I think to Syria and Turkey. Current envoy, U.S. envoy to Syria and Turkey, in which he said, actually, Tom Barrack, he said, well, these autocracies, he said, yes, we know they are not democracy, but they are doing well. They are benevolent, and they function in a better way than we want for other democracies, or something to that effect. I'm not quoting him, but that's the gist of what he said. And I think what he meant by this is that they don't even entertain the idea of working with democracies any longer in the Middle East. It's not like they say anymore that, for example, Israel is the only democracy, which is false, but it's like not even that. Now they plainly say they don't want any other democracy, any other even democratic, democracy like states in the Middle East, which is, I think, even another shift in the discourse even. So he's talking about what they call benevolent autocracy, that they theorize about people like MBS or MBZ, CC, and alike as the leaders that actually serve the interests you can make with deals with. You can easily, um, you know, basically make, you know, basically you can easily have an understanding of how the region should look like. At the expense, of course, and that's what matters to us, of their own people, of democratic values, of the future, of even their own local policies. And why I say that? Because how is this autocracy benevolent with this record of executions, with this impulsive behavior, with the blockade of Qatar, with the war in Yemen, with all the wars that they have engaged in, and with the atrocities to their own people, to the indigenous people, Abdurrahim Ahwaiti, to the Ahwaitat, and to so many other and how is this even benevolent when even their own records and their own assessment show that, for example, their mega projects are failing and they lack liquidity to the degree that the only remaining investments in the US is a fifth of what they have started like 5 or 6, 7 years ago from today. It's just a huge difference between the idea of this benevolent, let alone democracy. I know we agree that this is not democracy, this is autocracy, but even whether this is benevolent or not is at least to say questionable. So that's about the lack of stability. I think the last thing I want to mention in my remarks here is how the element of the people here works out in this equation. I mean, to many political leaders around the world, when dealing with Saudi Arabia, they have been basically fed and controlled by this narrative pushed by the Saudi government and these leaders and dictators in the Middle East, that the people of the Middle East are extreme by nature, backward by nature. This Orientalist approach that try to portray the people are as less deserving of democracy, less deserving of human rights, and therefore we should focus only on what matters to us, which is these strategic interests. I think what we want to push back against is that we, the Saudi people, I don't want to say we represent the Saudi people, but I say we, as part of the Saudi people, push for this agenda to prioritize the Saudi people. As an example, the People's Vision for Reform that we introduced in 2020 introduced 14 principles, basic principles about human rights, about dignity, about democracy, about elections, about labor rights, about women's rights, about children's rights, that try to say that we are not against diversifying the Saudi economy. On the contrary, actually, we want to diversify the Saudi economy, but we want to do that rightly through a represented parliament, represented institutions, representation, because you can't introduce taxation without representation if we're gonna, quote that, American revolutionary phrase. So the introduction of taxation in Saudi Arabia has been done, and it's time to have representation, and that's why we have an initiative like the People's Vision for Reform to say that the people of Saudi Arabia should have a say in the transformation, and the transformation cannot be benevolent, cannot be right without the participatory politics, without elections, without basic rights and dignity, social justice for the Saudi people.
Wonderful. Thank you, Abdullah. And I think we'll perhaps jump into those and other initiatives later on in the discussion a little bit. I want to jump over to Hala now for her opening statement. Hala, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, and everyone for organizing this and attending this briefing. I'm here to speak as a Saudi scholar and a Saudi activist whose life is actually invested in promoting rights and freedom for the Saudi people. It is not in our intention, me or Abdullah or other activists in exile, to call on any interventions from the US in regime change or on other attempts to embolden autocratic leaders in the region in general and in Saudi Arabia in particular. And what transpires from the 2 years genocide in Gaza has been horrific, basically, for the region. It will not be resolved for generations to come. And it really requires the foreign policy of the US in the Middle East to be drastically changed, to be based on people's interest and not being influenced only or mainly by the military industrial interests or basically the oil interests in energy or oil, or interests based on Israelis' narrative on what kind of foreign policy should be made in the US, in the Middle East. This has been disastrous, led to so many wars and destructions for the neighbors of Israel, as well as for other people. And of course, ended into the 2 years genocide that we're still witnessing for the Palestinian people. It also aligns the US with very reckless attempts to wage wars, whether with Iran, whether with Saudi Arabia and allies against Yemen. Already Abdullah talked about that. And really, it's a moment of recalculation of what is a good approach to center the interest of the nations in the region, with that of the US interest. Basically making sure that there are guarantees that there are no reckless wars. And of course, the US people have actually demonstrated against any involvement of the US in foreign wars. So I will basically talk a little bit about the objectives of the visit, what has been basically sourced in the media, such as the security pact. So the media reports that Saudi Arabia wants a Qatar Plus Pact, something similar to the Qatar Plus Pact, which calls on for the US to intervene to protect the Saudi regime in case of any kinds of threats to oil and other things. Now, if you look a little bit back, we did not see that involvement, whether for Qatar and others. Qatar has been attacked by Israel, an attack on the negotiators for peace. It doesn't mean anything because, historically, there are a lot of military bases, a lot of involvement of the military anyway, of the US military in the region. So it will not really bring back any kinds of safety measures to the Saudi people. I'm here focusing more on the interests of the Saudi people in terms of foreign policy. So the rationale of the US, as claimed is by President Trump, is to win back Saudi Arabia from China and to coax them into normalization with Israel. Now, to think about China is not really going to or attempting to dominate the region militarily, such as the US. They are doing more of an economic partnership with the region, and that's a major difference. And Saudi Arabia will likely not end its partnership with China, even with security pact with Israel. Now, the other region is, how can you put US interest, in context where two of its allies are calling for, the US to come and help them. If you think of Qatar, for instance, trying to target certain things or certain groups within Saudi Arabia, would the US go with that under the security pact? And we've seen that transpires in the war of Israel on the Palestinians. We've seen how it was very difficult to position the US support to any of its ally against another. this is something that is of very limited, benefit, if you would think of it, to the Saudis or to the US. Add to that the nature of the leaders in the region, and the leader of Saudi Arabia has been proven to be very reckless, right? So as Abdullah mentioned, the 8-year war on Yemen has been largely supported by the US and other countries, of course. And it ended only when the oil fields in Saudi, the oil infrastructure in Saudi has been hit, and we've lost in one night half of the production of the oil. So the whole policy is very problematic. The policy of going after wars and going after, or aligning with unchecked power, of an autocratic leader. This really plays out in, having more interest for the US people to have powers in places where, those powers or those leaders are controlled by certain checks and balances that really prevents such impulsive behavior in war, or that would compromise the interest of the countries such as US or Saudi Arabia. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is the purchase of F-35 that is highly really mentioned in the news, that Saudi Arabia are attempting to get a fleet of F-35. And this is something that UAE has actually attempted to do before and failed because of the restrictions on use and the sovereignty of UAE in using those kinds of aircrafts. So I don't think that also is going to help Saudi Arabia or the Saudi people. Now, the other aspect of the security pact is to push for normalization with Israel, which I think people of Saudi Arabia and the region are highly against. This will not help the people of Saudi Arabia because Israel is an unhinged criminal regime, and will also will not be in a position to create safety for any region, for any country in the region. I believe that most of the people in Saudi Arabia and in the region are actually supporting, isolating this regime and supporting their government to adhere by the international order and the international law, and really cut any kinds of relationship with Israel. In fact, people of Saudi Arabia have actually suffered from the surveillance state that has developed under Mohammed bin Salman, whether for people inside Saudi Arabia or for activists outside of Saudi Arabia, using Israeli companies' softwares and spywares such as NSO, to get to them, and of course resulting in crushing of critical voices, and led to transnational repression and the murder of Khashoggi. So basically, I believe that most of the nations are suffering because of what Abdullah says, that there is an invested interest of foreign policy to make more focus on energy, make more focus on Israeli interests, rather than being invested in promoting more checks and balances on autocratic leaders that could actually prevent disastrous decisions, such as the economy, for instance. A lot of people are talking about the economy of Saudi Arabia being on the right track. But of course, as Abdullah mentioned, there is a lot of evictions from wide, swaths of land, not only in Neom, to make place for imaginary and unattainable projects, but also in Jeddah and Riyadh and other places. People who are actually trying to invest in Saudi Arabia, I'm talking about Saudi people, I'm not talking about other people, are being, played out and abused, and their assets are forcibly transferred to influential, officials or influential businessmen with ties to the regime. This does not create any kinds of economic diversification, so it's also not in the interest of the Saudi people. And I just want to remind people that there were $2 trillion given to Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of President Trump, for investment in Israel, not investment in the US or in Saudi Arabia. And this is, of course, is not aligned with economic diversification or making sure that we are investing in our people. I second Abdullah in reminding people of another path, people who are influencing the relationship with Saudi Arabia, the path where they support people's vision that is centered on the rights and social justice, on the principles that Abdullah just mentioned. We cannot have, no checks and no balances, no guarantees of sustainable developments in a very repressive regime. This is a very repressive regime, and it doesn't serve the interests. I just want people to remember, repression could lead to violence. Repression could lead to, what happened in Syria, people carrying arms. So these are things that, in the best interest of Saudis and the US to ensure that there are, balances and checks and rights and freedom, support for rights and freedom, and within countries of their allies. So yeah, I read also that this visit is a pre-coronation event for MBS, and I do agree on that. I think that is the most tangible outcome, a refurbishment basically, of MBS image by showcasing him exactly. Comes to mind the picture of President Trump in his first term on 2018 with Mohammed bin Salman, where both of them are actually, exchanging huge Saudi funds for aircrafts and for other military, equipments. And Trump is trying to show how much, works and jobs and things will be generated for the people without actually thinking about the people of Saudi Arabia, and the impact of emboldening people, emboldening leaders to go after war and, another war. At the time, of course, it was the Yemen war. So I'll stop here and we'll see what kind of questions we would have.
Thanks, Hala. I want to jump over now to Sarah Lee. Sarah Lee, specifically, maybe jumping into some of the geopolitical components of the U.S.-Saudi relationship would be ideal. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Hala and Abdullah for their brave, courageous, relentless, tireless advocacy for human rights in Saudi Arabia, at great personal risk to themselves, and just such dedication and devotion. I am so grateful to both of you, and you are really role models for all of us, particularly those who support democracy and human rights in not just in Saudi Arabia, but throughout the region. I know it's not easy, and you guys are sticking with it, and thank you. I wanted to focus a little bit on the US policy aspects of what is likely to emerge out of these meetings, what it represents for US democracy, and what the consequences will be for the region, because as I'm sure the audience already knows, US policy decisions in the Middle East tend to impact the people of the region more than anyone else in the world. The rehabilitation of Mohammed bin Salman over the past 8 years since the murder of Khashoggi has been nothing less than remarkable. It is an extraordinary political feat. I don't think many imagined that Mohammed bin Salman would be back on a red carpet having a state dinner in the White House following the global outrage at the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, who was, as Alex noted, was the founder of Dawn. In the immediate wake, and there may be people here too young to even remember, in the immediate wake of the murder, the entire globe suddenly woke up to the reality of the Mohammed bin Salman nightmare, an impulsive, reckless, reportedly drug addicted ruler who nobody could question in Saudi Arabia. Nobody could advise in Saudi Arabia to say, this war in Yemen is not such a great idea. Here we are 8 years later, billions and billions of Saudi treasure wasted, resulting in nothing other than the destruction of hundreds of thousands of Yemeni lives. Absolutely nothing gained. And the main reason for this is everybody knew this would be the outcome, but nobody dared say anything to Mohammed bin Salman. And not just, of course, the murder of Khashoggi, but the assaults on activists inside and outside of the country. All of a sudden, people woke up to this, including the Biden administration. Of course, President Biden campaigned on a promise to end military support for Saudi Arabia, to make Mohammed bin Salman the pariah that he is, saying that there was no social redeeming value to the Saudi government. And within 2 years of his own coming to power, a dramatic return to kiss the royal Saudi ring in the fist bumps seen around the world, with President Biden showing up in Riyadh, hat in hand, wanting to bury the hatchet and put this all behind him. I mean, we went from the Biden administration narrowly sanctioning Mohammed bin Salman himself for the murder of Khashoggi, not just with the so-called Khashoggi ban, but even under the Magnitsky sanctions that the Trump administration had imposed on 19 Saudis for the murder of Khashoggi, to now welcoming him into Washington, and not only sort of feting him for whatever lucrative deals he can pass to American businesses, but also to potentially actually help as a stabilizing force, contrary to Israeli belligerence that we've seen in the past 2 years. And, you know, if you examine closely why this dramatic change happened, it really is not because MBS, in fact, has turned out to be a great reformer, although we have to recognize that there have been dramatic changes in Saudi Arabia with the lifting of a lot of the state-enforced gender segregation, with some significant reforms to the guardianship system, with some significant reforms to the migrant worker, so-called kafala system. You know, there are reforms that have taken place primarily in the field of social liberalization, but there has been absolutely no change. In fact, a dramatic worsening of the autocracy of the Saudi state, of the concentration of power that used to be held among three sort of pillars of the Saudi establishment: the religious establishment, the business community, and the royal family. That shared power, although not democratic, was at least shared with some kind of eternal checks and balances. Those have been destroyed, and in their place is Mohammed bin Salman, sole decision maker. And the results of that are, you know, the tens of billions of dollars wasted in a project like NEOM, fantastic, implausible, unbelievable, but nobody dares question Mohammed bin Salman or to question his spending, given the spending he controls as the head of the Saudi state and the head of the Public Investment Fund. So what did change, I think, is basically the transparent transactional nature of U.S. foreign policy, even under the Biden administration. And I want to emphasize, this is not a Trump problem. This is not a Republican problem. This is a problem that goes to the heart of U.S. foreign policy failures in the Middle East for several decades, is the mercenary transactional nature of our relationship with Saudi Arabia and our relationship with much of the Gulf, which is to sell protection, sell the military protection of the United States in exchange for money to American business interests. Now, those business interests have largely been represented by the earnings of defense companies. But what Mohammed bin Salman did is strategically deploy the wealth of Saudi Arabia to expand his influence and control, so that it wasn't just the American defense companies that would profit from being aligned with Saudi Arabia, but a very broad swath of America's economy, investing Saudi resources in finance, in technology, in AI, in agriculture, farming, oil, gas, entertainment, movies, arts, tennis, golf, and even the Metropolitan Opera of the United States is now on the dole of Mohammed bin Salman. Even American comedians, raunchy, brash, irreverent comedians who, take great pride in their freedom of speech are now on the payroll of Mohammed bin Salman. And so when President Trump came back to power, the pretense of having strategic considerations that we were told dictate a pivot to Asia, a withdrawal from military entanglements from the Middle East, those are just flushed down the toilet because at bottom, the American administration of Trump and the Biden administration before it prioritized one thing: U.S. military hegemony in the region through relationships with the dictatorships, namely Mohammed bin Salman, but also the UAE's Mohammed bin Zayed, in exchange for business and profits for American companies. And now, of course, American political officials themselves who are on the take. They are on the dime. Hundreds of U.S. military personnel and former government officials now actually work for or do deals with the Saudi government. You have seen already extensive reporting on the Trump family's own personal investments and profits coming directly from the Saudi government. So we have ultimate sort of reflection of state capture. The American state has been captured by business and individual profit interests. And the people who are paying the bill are the American people, are the American soldiers, the men and women in the American military who will be required to risk their lives to save Mohammed bin Salman and the royal family should they come under attack. So what Saudi Arabia is getting in exchange is not just washing its reputation, the so-called sports washing and arts washing and all of that. No, it's much more than that. It's influence and control in order to buy protection for the Saudi regime, in order to allow it to continue to rule as a dictatorship with the full force and backing of the US government. Now, of course, this is really bad for Saudi Arabia, but it's also really bad for the United States. It's bad for my country and my nation, for my government to be selling the American people's support in exchange for corporate interests and in exchange for the profits of American politicians. It's also very dangerous and risky. I do not believe that a US security guarantee for an impulsive, reckless ruler whom nobody is afraid to question, not even to explain the laws of physics to them as to why his cockamamie line city was not possible on the planet Earth under the current laws of physics that we all respect. If they're even too afraid to say that to him, how are they going to tell him that his impunity and his belligerence will not be secure and protected and rewarded by this US Defense Pact? One thing that is not going to happen is an Abraham Accords, because this is something that I think even Mohammed bin Salman understands would not be tolerated by the Saudi people in the face of the genocide that we've seen over the past 2 years, and in the face of what is very clearly an Israeli plan to expel or exterminate all remaining Palestinians with no pathway ever for a Palestinian state. It is interesting to note that this is something that the Saudi government understands is a step too far, even for an absolute dictatorship like itself to take. And no one is to blame for this more than the Israeli government itself, which has undermined any possibility, sabotaged any possibility of a so-called Abraham Accords agreement with Saudi Arabia. But I think the Israelis made the calculation that that Saudi agreement was not worth achieving their dreams, which they've seen an opening for, which is to take all of Palestine and push all of the Palestinian people out. And the United States has now delinked the $600 billion promised investments from Saudi Arabia, the possible sale of F-35s to Saudi Arabia, a defense agreement for Saudi Arabia, delinked that from an Abraham Accords agreement for the benefit of Israel. I do think delinking these things is a good thing. I don't think they should be mixed. I don't think the United States should continue to pay bribes to foreign governments to get them to supposedly make peace with Israel. If anyone's going to pay that bill, it should be the Israeli people, not the American people. And I think that American people are increasingly waking up to the fact that our government has been suspiciously at the service and benefit of the Israeli people far more than it has the American people. The Republican Party is having a tear down, knockdown fight about this, a more honest debate about this than the Democratic Party is. But the Democratic Party is paying the price too. The election of Zohran Mamdani in New York City was not just a city mayoral election, it was a national referendum on continued support to Israel. And the overwhelming win of Zohran Mamdani should have sent a very strong message to the Democratic Party if the failure of Kamala Harris to win was not message enough. And finally, I'll note that there are so many candidates now that are running advertising their refusal to take AIPAC money. Again, signals that the American people have had enough of the corruption of the foreign influence that has really reduced American foreign policy to a service for billionaires and corporations in the United States. I'll pause there and hopefully we can have some discussion.
Great. Thank you, Sarah Lee. Wonderful, wonderful intro right there. Oh, sorry.
Alex, sorry, I just want to add one thing about the normalization, though I do agree with certain aspects of it. But I think that that also what was mentioned on the U.S. side is that they wanted the Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries to help in reconstruction efforts in Gaza. So that is something that should not be accepted for the Saudi people, exactly as it's not supposed to be accepted by the U.S. People. And the only people who have to basically reconstruct Gaza are those who destroyed it. In fact, in a Jewish youth meeting in Germany with the Israeli foreign minister, he told them that if Gaza were to be constructed, Israel will destroy it again. So this is something that, this is a problem that is very much, going to continue. And I think Qatar has mentioned that as well. We're not going to participate in the reconstruction, knowing that Israel will destroy everything again.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Hala. And I think that's a really important point to raise as we discuss this idea of, what does a more realistic, perhaps pragmatic U.S.-Saudi relationship look like? And I think what we actually have Raed Jarrar with us, Dawn's advocacy director, who wanted to kind of start our discussion off, kind of pose a bit of a context and a question for everyone. So, Raed, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Alex, Abdullah, Hala, and Sarah Lee. Thank you for the excellent framing. I really like how we're positioning the conversation here about balancing the U.S.-Saudi relationship, and that is important because, on the one hand, we don't want to come across as like purists. We understand there is pragmatism. There are, real politics happening there. There are human rights considerations on the other hand. But the question is, how can we, envision a nature of this very, very toxic, long relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia? How can we envision it in a way that will actually be matching U.S. interests? How would we envision it in a way that it will actually respect U.S. law? How would we envision it in a way that would follow universal human rights values? And that, for me, is the complicated question. As the organization that was founded by Jamal Khashoggi, we haven't seen any serious effort coming from MBS or the Saudi government to close the loop on what happened with Jamal Khashoggi. We know that he was killed by Saudis, and the Saudi government has not done anything, not even the minimum. They haven't even told us where his body is to date. They haven't even told us where his body is to give him a burial. They haven't reached out to his family. They haven't reached out to his community to ensure that his memory is respected and that there is any form of accountability. So I'm just saying, like, my question for you, like especially, Abdullah and Hala, like, I know me and Sarah talk about this all the time, so I'm not going to ask her the question. But Abdullah and Hala, like the question is, how do you think in this moment in 2025, how do you think we should be asking for justice and accountability for Jamal Khashoggi? Something that is reasonable, something that is will be taken seriously at this moment, more than us. Like if we stand outside the White House now and say, put Mohammed bin Salman in jail, it's not going to happen now. We understand that. But what are the things that we can actually ask for to push for accountability in the case of Jamal Khashoggi that you think will strike that balance of respecting our interests and laws and human rights and being pragmatic?
Hello, or Abdullah, either of you, if you'd like to go ahead.
Well,
Sure, let me.
oh, sorry, go ahead, Abdullah. Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to listen to you. Go ahead first.
So I believe that we should start here in the US by looking at those who are emboldening autocratic leaders. And as Sarah mentioned, they are actually there for personal benefit, for personal interests. They are not there to use their leverage over other countries to ensure that there is social justice, that there are consequences for crimes. I think it says a lot when you look at the genocide. It says a lot about the US leadership, both leadership. I'm not talking about a certain leadership, whether Democratic or Republicans. So I think you should start here, Raed. You should work on the politicians who are actually influence the relationship, the Foreign Policy Committee in Congress, the people who are actually, framing and influencing the relationship with autocrats in general. You should work here on the institutions. You should demand in terms of what needs to be done. You should demand people-to-people diplomacy. You should demand rule of law in Saudi Arabia. There are a lot of leverage the US could use. You should hold those people who are engaged in Saudi regime for money, for their own personal interest, accountable. I think that would definitely change, the behavior of the regime. The regime will not change, will not, start any process of seeking justice for Jamal. They are involved in the killing, right? So unless you apply leverage to ensure that there are balances and checks inside Saudi Arabia, by working on your own government here, by working on the legislators, the business community, the influencers, the people in sport and in arts, I think there is little to be expected. Go ahead, Abdullah.
Yes, I totally agree with Hala. And if I'm going to add anything, I'm going to see it from the policy or the advocacy perspective. I think on the more libertarian Republican side, the more America First side, the more these folks, I think it makes more sense to say that, well, if it's America First, how is prioritizing this guy helps America First? How is putting these lavish welcoming visit first over Americans who are detained or banned from traveling the US in Saudi Arabia is America First at all? Or how does any of that help the American interest? So that's one. On the progressive side, the more like people who understand and try or pretend to care more about like human rights, maybe the idea that if you want a normal relationship with any country like Saudi Arabia, uh, it's not haram, it's not bad to have a relationship. We're not against having a relationship per se. We're against having a relationship that is built on this kind of sick agreements that prioritize what they call security, and by security they mean security of the throne, security of MBS, security of the royal family over security of the people, over security of the locals, over security of the indigenous people, over security of everything else in Saudi Arabia. This is not security of Saudi Arabia, nor security of the US either. How is sending Americans to die for the Saudi royal family? Is America first for these libertarians, or how does that even help American interests or American values on the progressive side? So I think this rhetoric, I'm hoping, can at least try to approach that. I think my second point here is going to be something that I have long talked about, which is the idea that the kind of relationship right now between the Trump administration and MBS is more individualistic, is more about like this relationship. It's more like familial kind of. It's about like exchanging business deals, gifts, things of that nature. And for this to be, for any relationship to be normal and institutionalized, it have to engage the representative folks. It have to engage the public, the people. For example, here in the US, for any deal with Saudi Arabia, like real deal, not executive ordered kind of deal, it has to be approved by the Senate. How does any deal from the Saudi side, uh, you know, be approached right now? It's just like MBS's mind. Nobody, no parliament, no checks and balances, as Hala and Sarah mentioned. Nothing of that nature existed or exists in Saudi Arabia, and therefore the relationship itself is not helping even U.S. interest, let alone the Saudi people interest or the long-term interest of both parties. I don't know if this helps or answers anything, right?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Barely, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or if not, I can move on.
No, we can move on.
Okay, certainly. So when we're talking about the kind of the point of this meeting and the push for, U.S. Saudi pact and more specifically a Saudi Israeli pact, uh, how does Saudi Arabia's role in Gaza kind of impact this relationship, right? When we're thinking of, Saudi Arabia's ability to perhaps influence that situation, how does the U.S. best kind of approach that dynamic, right? From my understanding, Israel and Saudi Arabia have already worked together for quite a long time. They've already been moving towards a relationship for quite a long time. The U.S. kind of push to become closer to Saudi Arabia seems just like an add-on, right? Um, we understand Saudi Arabia's influential role in the region, uh, but do we need to add on all of these extra pieces, right, to get Saudi Arabia to do things that maybe are beneficial, like ending the genocide in Gaza, for example? I don't know who would like to take that one.
I don't think I'm as well placed as Abdullah and Hala to comment on the internal political dynamics in Saudi Arabia. I know what I've heard Saudi government officials, including the foreign minister, say to justify and defend why they haven't signed the accords, and that is our people will not tolerate that. Whether that's the reason or whether they personally, individually, as breathing, living human beings, think it's a bad idea in the face of this genocide, that's the outcome. It's true that Saudi Arabia has had secret relationships with Saudi Arabia for a long time. I believe he secretly flew into Saudi at some point for some kind of negotiations and discussions. But I think that the lie that even Mohammed bin Salman was uttering a few years ago, that Saudis don't care about Palestine and Palestinians, there was this army of bots on Twitter and Facebook that would attack Palestinians or pro-Palestine content as being, oh, the Palestinian homeless people, and they're weaklings, they're losers. These are literally the kinds of tweets I would see from supposedly Saudi accounts, that they were actively sort of participating in the denigration and trashing of Palestinians, because I think they wanted to build up the potential possibility of this Abraham Accords. The Gaza genocide blew all of that out of the water. And that's, I think, the reality that the Saudi government has to contend with. I think that if they can get what they want from the US, they don't really need to be friends with Israel. They can continue their secret arrangements, their secret sharing of intelligence, which is going on ever since Saudi and Israel came under the same US Central Command, Middle East Command umbrella. So why should they advertise it now that it's very clear to them that the overwhelming majority of Saudis, by the way, like the overwhelming majority of all of the humans on this planet, strongly oppose Israel.
Abdullah or Hala, would you like to add anything?
Well, as
Hala?
Sarah mentioned, there has been very long-term coordination with the Israeli that started, to get stronger after Mohammed bin Salman came to power. In fact, officers from this Israeli intelligence came to train people in the state security on how to gather data, how to analyze the data. They have been very much involved, and during the the first months of the genocide, when Israeli needed more supplies, more support, there was actually a route that supported the Israeli needs from goods or anything, that was coordinated by several Arab countries, including through Saudi Arabia airfield. That has never been the case when Saudi and other countries in the region blockaded Qatar. They actually closed their airfield, they closed the border, they made a lot of threats. And to add on the campaign, within Saudi Arabia, this also goes back to the idea that how dictators actually promote certain political options to their people. Most of the commentators inside Saudi Arabia before October 23 were actually promoting the Abraham Accord as Saudi first. We need more security for the regime, we need more interests, exchange of technology. So the same, basically, MAGA movement that happened here in the US. And of course, it was disrupted, as Sarah mentioned, by that. And I don't think it will stop the informal coordination between Israel and Saudi Arabia, despite the massive popular, rejection of the idea.
Abdullah?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Great comments both. There is an overlooked podcast in which Jadid Kushner actually spoke about the idea of normalization with Israel from the Saudi side early on. He mentioned that during the podcast, he mentioned that before the Trump's first term inauguration, there was an indirect talks with the Saudis through a Saudi economist named Fahad al-Tunisi, who was representing MBS, about relationship with the Trump admin. And he said during these talks, he said I sat down And I said, let's see what you guys can offer. And he said, well, MBS is willing to offer anything that the US is wanting to achieve. And then Jared Kushner, he said, yeah, there are 3 files. And he said, one of the files that he mentioned was normalization with Israel. And the response from the Saudis was like, yeah, of course, sure. Once we have the full control of power at the time, remember, there was like a rival MBN as a crown prince, and MBS was only deputy crown prince. So he said, once we are in total control, this will be definitely part of my agenda. And another thing was about the madrasas and the relationship to the Wahhabi idea. And the third was about women. So what MBS said on all 3 files, yes, 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 we'll definitely do that. And then so after MBS came to power, the idea was of the Abraham Accord to cash in that old promise of MBS. MBS, as you guys all know, advocated and pushed many countries, including Sudan and Bahrain, to join the Abraham Accord. And he said, we are going to join the Abraham Accord. It's just like we are the big prize, and we're the big prize, and we want a big prize for it that actually can, equates the level of influence of the Saudi normalization with Israel. And if you guys hear in the past, I would say 1.5 years and 1 year, like the past 12 months, these leaks from the Saudi side about how MBS is saying, for example, and he said one time to one senator that he said, when a Sadat normalized with Israel, he was assassinated. Do you want me to get assassinated? So he said he's like basically hiring the price for normalization. And he said in multiple occasions, including very, very recently, including I think 2 days ago, to some reporters, that he's not against it. He's not against the idea of normalization. It's just like he wants, a good price for it. That's what he's trying to say. Also the leaks that the vast majority, to the degree that 98% of the Saudi public is against normalization, was actually published at one point by the Saudi government itself. And I think it's the only accurate thing that they ever published or they ever put to public. And they only published that and allowed it to happen to say to the Americans, well, look, we're going to go against the vast majority of the public. And we're doing that. We can do that for you. We definitely are willing to do that for you. And as you guys all mentioned, like Hala and Sarali mentioned, there's already like open channels for a long time between the two, between the Israeli side and the Saudi side. And for this normalization deal, to change anything is to put this to public, to make it a more diplomatic, direct, basically relationship where they exchange embassies and all. And I think for this to happen, it's only going to benefit the Israelis. I mean, I'm not even talking now about human rights or anything else, like just from the political side itself. Like how even a dictator like MBS is going to benefit from the idea of normalization right now, especially with everything going on with this bad package of Netanyahu and the Israeli government, and this in the backdrop of this genocide in Gaza. How is the MBS is going to benefit? And for him, he's nevertheless is willing to give up everything and to normalize if there is something that they can offer for him. And I think that's what he's trying to achieve. And for him, what deserves that is not what the Saudi people or the Saudi public thinks it's something that benefits him personally and his throne. Just want to end with that.
No, well said, Abdullah. And I think this Israel-Saudi normalization component really speaks to the unhealthy nature of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, right? It's prioritizing the wrong items. The benevolent autocracy that you were kind of discussing, which is realistically this view, if we just give everyone what they want, everything will be okay in the Middle East, even though it's increasingly not the case. And so I think it's a really, really important point to raise. We do have a question in the Q&A that kind of piggybacks off that, if you will, a little bit. We'd understand that the U.S. officials regularly say that they're working for U.S. interests, right? And what this attendee is asking is why the United States so often publicly avoids raising human rights concerns in these conversations, as opposed to focusing on security, just as one example. Why does the United States so often kind of boot human rights down to the bottom of the list, or just strictly rhetorically speak about human rights, as opposed to some of these other issues? And what's a better path in the region today? And then I pose that to all three of you.
I'll just quickly say this story, and leave it to my colleagues to elaborate. But I think I remember, I remember I was talking to a former Saudi minister when he was representing the Saudi government in talks with diplomats and officials from the West, and he said, I remember vividly, there is one time when we discussed so many things and interest and transactions and other stuff, and he said at the very end of the meeting, like 5 minutes left of the meeting, he said, "Okay, you know what? Also, I want to ask you about one small thing." And he said, "Yeah, well, what do you mean?" He said, "You guys in Saudi Arabia did this and this violations, and I just want to ask you about your opinion about this." So the minister said, "Yeah, sure. Well, this is not under my agenda, nor under my control, but I can ask my fellow minister Guy to address this issue. But why are you asking? I didn't understand. Do you want this to be resolved or something?" So the Western minister responded, said, "No, I couldn't care any less. But the idea is for me to honestly said, I raised this issue with you guys whenever I go back to my people and I get asked about it." So this is just a story that shows the level of even those who raise a human rights concern, what that means for everyone else.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Abdullah. There is a little political will in the foreign governments and what's so-called the democratic governments to intervene on issues of human rights and democracy and the political prisoners. And these are actually manifested a lot during the 2 years genocide in Gaza. We've seen how the media has been covering up, the political leaders have been enabling the genocide. So I would say there is no serious political will in the elected officials in the West to support the cause of human rights. They do not see that as a priority of the political agenda, as the energy issues, as the compliant autocratic regimes, and as Abdullah mentioned, the envoy for Syria, the American envoy for Syria and Iraq, or Turkey, sorry, he actually said it. We prefer a benevolent dictator. Benevolent to who? To those in power, not to the people. So this is why I think it is important to protect the voices and to amplify the voices of the civil society, help them reach people outside, help them educate people outside, so that when they elect people, as exactly what happened in the election of Mamdani, they are holding them accountable and they're asking them the right questions. And we've seen that manifesting through different race, basically, for election. And when engaging with the Saudi, I hope that the media here in the US can raise those issues, can actually speak about, the lack of freedoms, lack of rights, and the serious violations, executions, and others that is happening in Saudi Arabia, and of course, accountability for Jamal. I hope that happened during the visit as well.
I just want to add one thing, which is, the US government's corruption, the Saudi government's dictatorship, those are pretty obvious. But I think what's less obvious is the complicity of Arab business elites, particularly Arab diaspora business elites, who have refused to speak critically about abuses in Saudi Arabia, though they have a lot to say about Israeli abuses and the genocide in Gaza, who have even looked into my face and said, oh no, but MBS is going to help the Palestinians and he's the only one who's protecting the Palestinians by, curbing the Israelis. Also, well, we can't say anything about Saudi because we have all these business deals with MBS. And I'm like, you know what? You're really not much better than the American corrupt business elites who are doing business with MBS or doing business with the Israelis. Your freedom. One even said to me, oh, democracy is overrated. Look at China and and Singapore. They're doing well without democracy. Look at the US, it's got a democracy, but the economy is so bad or people are suffering and so forth. And, meanwhile, they're uttering this from the safe preserve of American democracy, where they have at least some modicum of free speech and political representation. And, it's embarrassing and it's shameful that the wealthy and powerful business elites, Arab business elites, who should know better and should be doing better are not. They are selling themselves just like American businesses are selling themselves. So I don't want to hear you crying about Palestine if you're not going to have a principled position on the suffering of the Saudi people living under dictatorship. I mean, obviously, it's not a genocide and it's not as bad, but the principles are the same. It's the lack of human rights and the lack of democracy. That's the problem.
Yeah, it speaks to a lot of things kind of being flipped on their head, right? In some ways, which is unfortunate in the U.S.-Saudi relationship.
I
So,
just wanted to add something to what Sarah mentioned as well. It is not mainly the lack of human rights or the lack of representation or democratic, deliberation of power. It is the fact that unhinged leaders are actually causing disastrous outcomes for their people, for the region, are actually engaging in, unprecedented, violent wars without any kinds of measures in place to justify those kinds of action. So it's not only about human rights or about democratic deliberation of power. It is also about making sure that the people of the region can actually attain sustainable development without unwarranted aggression. And this aggression affects everyone, including people in the US. As Abdullah mentioned, we have dual citizenship people in the Arab world who are Americans and Saudis who have actually complained from the lack of support when they are caught, by the regime for a post on X for a certain expression of opinion. And, a lot of advocacy had been done on their behalf, but the officials and the diplomatic missions really did the bare minimum to support them, bare minimum. And many of them are actually, even when they are released, remain under travel bans. So just put that in mind, that even the interests of the American people are not protected.
yes, very well said, Hala. And it kind of speaks to the last question that I want to pose specifically to you and Abdullah. Within this kind of framing of, it seems like unaccountable elite interests really taking precedence over the people in both the United States and Saudi Arabia. What are actions that you both as civil society actors, as activists, are taking or can take, especially in this area of political dissidence where Saudi Arabia actively attacks people fighting for democracy and human rights in Saudi Arabia? What are some big steps that you're taking or hope to take to hopefully, as we say, right size this relationship?
For us as Saudis in exile, we have tried so much to promote and advocate for those within Saudi Arabia, for their freedom, for campaigning for them, meeting legislators in Europe or in the UK or other places in order to push for more rights and more freedom for the people of Saudi Arabia. We already talked in our briefing on the people vision that is aimed to replace Vision 2030 and center on social justice and protection of the people of Saudi Arabia. So I think what we need to do is to be able to go on with this type of work and to promote it and to partner with like-minded people in the US in order to make sure that they can amplify our voices as well. But, it is not an easy feat, as Sarah mentioned, because of lack of political will again. But we try to keep on doing what we're doing to raise interest and, here in the West, and to make sure that, the cases, the main highlighted, main leading cases of Saudis who have been targeted inside or outside of Saudi Arabia, are being documented, and we can hold the government accountable through several means. Sometimes we manage to do that. Sometimes we manage to free certain political prisoners or prisoners of conscience, but others, it requires more support. And that's why we need people in the US to elect those people who are actually responsible leaders who can support the interests of both nations.
Yes, totally agree with Hala on this. And I want to also say that believe it or not, the people has a power, and they can push back, and they can I mean it no longer the case. It's no longer the case where Saudi Arabia manipulate and monopolize on the narrative of what the Saudi people look like and what the Saudi public is, and the interests of the Saudi people. Look right now at the coverage, the mention of Saudi Arabia anywhere in any documentary about Saudi Arabia, in any piece about Saudi Arabia, any media, TV interview, book, chapter, and even decisions, orders, resolutions, or even legislations about Saudi Arabia, anywhere in any parliament in the world, you will always see the touches, the fingerprints of these courageous activists like Hala and many others, around the world. The fingerprints of the great advocates, even like Sarah Lee Whitson. She just published now a piece with a foreign policy, a piece about Saudi Arabia and the rehabilitation, and put in Americans, and American blood to the service of this dictator in Riyadh, and then look at the many, like even those who did not even genuinely believe in human rights and democratic values, they found it really embarrassing to cover Saudi Arabia and a story about Saudi Arabia and Crown Prince and his visit without mentioning Khashoggi or Khashoggi's name, or human rights or executions or Yemen war, or things that really basically shows the other side. A lot of the people who even approach us for their coverage, but their stories, I mean, there are, of course, great allies across the board. But I mean, some of the people who approach us is because they want to fill the story so they don't look bad. They don't look like they are covering the story from only one side. Of course, there are people who like go beyond and really, represent one side if they never cared. But I'm talking about the ordinary folks who really wants a genuine and serious coverage and a story about Saudi Arabia. I think that's a huge win, and it shows the power of pushing back, the power of advocating for the right thing, and advocating for human rights in the long term. Look at us now, many years after the Khashoggi. Of course, there is no actual accountability, but there is a great awareness. I mean, like the Gaza war itself is a lesson to everyone. Something that was unspoken of, unheard of, to find even empathizers and sympathizers like for the Palestinians anywhere, or even understanding about the genocide anywhere. It was a G word that is avoided. There was like unspoken of anywhere. And now look at it. It's just like a common phrase. People talk about it. It's there's actually a level of push against those who avoid it. So it's just a lesson to every and each one of us.
Well said, Abdullah and Hala. Just for everyone's awareness, I am sharing Sarah Lee's and Abdullah's latest pieces on the subject in the chat for our attendees to see. We do have a question in the chat really briefly about how American citizens can help promote human rights in Saudi Arabia. What we can do is definitely share both Abdullah's organization, the Middle East Democracy Center, and our organization, Dawn. I'm not sure if Abdullah, you want to say more on that, just because we're running low on time, but you're open to. If not, then that's fine.
I think Sarah Lee should take that. Sorry to put you on the spot.
I really don't have anything to add other than to encourage Americans to be as engaged on these questions of foreign policy and what's at stake, which is not just about what's happening in the Middle East, but the integrity of American democracy. I mean, in all my life, I don't think I have ever seen the American government come under the control of influence of foreign governments to the extent it has now. There was a time when it was just Israel and Israel supporters who controlled and influenced U.S. policy in the Middle East. And now the U.S. government has put itself out, prostituting the American people for the highest bidder. And so the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Qataris, they've all gotten in on the game. And the only ones left holding the bag are the American people. We can do something about this much more easily than the Saudi people can do about the dictatorship that they face. But what's really at risk is America's own democracy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah Lee. And so I guess that we'll call it with that. I want to thank all of our panelists and especially Abdullah and Hala for your incredible work and bravery in this difficult context, and to everyone fighting for human rights and democracy in Saudi Arabia. Thank you to our audience as well for participating. And yes, I hope everyone has a wonderful day and week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
so much.